if you've read your Facebook news feed this week, you most likely saw an article that said coconut oil is unhealthy. And not only that, that it has never been unhealthy. Well, I got a couple of guys here that are going to disagree with that. Sean Heisen and Onnit CEO Aubrey Marcus. Guys, what is going on?
Yeah, this is a lot. It's a lot of more of the same is what's going on. It's something that we've been fighting against on the nutrition side for years now. And this is just the latest iteration of bad science that is probably contributing to the death of a lot of different people. So it's fucked up.
Yeah, so to bring it down to a basic level first, because a lot of people may not understand, what are the differences? Because the whole thing was based around saturated fats being unhealthy for you, and this was put out by the American Heart Association. So can you tell us the difference between saturated fats, polysaturated fats, and what they're trying to get to in this article they put out?
Yeah, this is, if you look back at the history of the worst advice from nutritionists, it's been that what they call the diet heart hypothesis, this idea that the intake of saturated fats is bad for the heart, and that increasing either carbohydrates or switching your saturated fat to polyunsaturated fat is going to be better for the heart. And this is something that they've been putting out for a long time. And the preponderance of evidence has shown something quite the contrary. I think a meta-analysis in 2010 came out that looked at 347,000 different patients from different trials, 21 different clinical trials, I believe. And it showed that there was actually no connection between saturated fat and heart disease. And continued studies continue to come out. Meta-analyses, the gold standard of all of the best research, has undeniably severed that link between saturated fat and heart disease, finding instead that the correlations are more likely involved with sugar and different other substitutes that people weren't aware of. Even things that we take for granted, like the 7 Nations studies and looking at the Mediterranean diet, and then carving out weird things like what they call the French paradox, right? Which was, the French are eating a lot of fat and they don't have a lot of heart disease. What is that? It's just a paradox. We'll discard that data. So it's been this categorical inclusion of the evidence that supports their hypothesis and the exclusion of evidence that denies their hypothesis. But basically they came to it with the case to prove and just tried to gather all the data they could to prove that case, and not actually taken, the proper scientific approach and looked at, all right, what's the truth here? And I think that's another issue of what's going on here.
So this goes back to a certain trial they did, or some research they did that, Sean, you were kind of enlightening me about earlier. Want to share a little bit of info on that?
Well, there have been a lot of studies that they show, what the American Heart Association is basically building this argument on is that consumption of saturated fat is going to elevate levels of LDL cholesterol, which a lot of nutritionists call the bad kind of cholesterol. But they can't even prove that. They can't even prove that it elevates LDL cholesterol. Furthermore, they can't prove that LDL cholesterol is bad.
But there are some links that show that it improves LDL cholesterol as a whole, but there's 2 different types of LDL cholesterol. There's the small, dense particles, which is actually the particles that get lodged inside your arteries because they're little tiny. Imagine, so your
those
arteries
are the ones they're saying they're going to give you a heart attack.
Right. So what they're worried about is atherosclerosis, like the building up of fat in these arteries, building up of lipid in the artery itself. And that happens when these really small, dense particles, imagine them running over the surface of an inflamed artery, and then they get stuck in the little cracks and crevices of these stressed, inflamed arteries, right? And so only the small, dense ones do that, but also included in LDL cholesterol are these large, fluffy particles, which, like HDL cholesterol, which is quotation good cholesterol, they're actually involved in shepherding some of the LDL cholesterol back into the liver. So it actually takes it out of the bloodstream. So it's like basically what they're saying is, all dogs are going to kill you, right? Except there's some dogs that are actually going to kill you. And then there's other dogs that are going to herd those bad dogs back to the kennel, but they're not making that distinction. They're just saying, yeah, canines are dangerous, and that's this, problem with these associations and correlation games that they're playing that aren't accurate. Every study shows, and as Sean was saying, that it increases LDL cholesterol, but not the bad kind. It increases the good kind. It improves your lipid profile. It gives you the helpful cholesterol. In my analogy, the good dogs that are going to shepherd the bad canines back to the pound, which is your liver. So they really have it, this correlation game they're playing is just wrong.
Mm-hmm. And I saw they also kind of shit on the whole fact, that people have used coconut oil in increasing their fat intake, they actually lose weight too. So they kind of hit on that a little bit as well.
Yeah, there's a massive study, 2009. Let me dig it up for you. The journal Lipids reported that when these researchers compared coconut oil versus soybean oil in obese women, the coconut oil group ended up having higher HDL, the good cholesterol, so-called good, and improved ratios of LDL and to HDL. The soybean oil group, on the other hand, which is polyunsaturated fats, the kind the government wants you to eat, their cholesterol, the total cholesterol went up, their LDL went up, their HDL went down, which is never a good thing, and their ratio of LDL to HDL got worse.
And there was some weight loss associated with that trial.
Plus, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Plus, the coconut oil women who were obese lost weight taking the coconut oil.
Whoops. And you know what the funny part about this study is? They go on to talk about coconut oil, and they go, I think in the study they say, let me actually have it right here. And coconut oil has no known offsetting favorable effects. No known.
Ridiculous
statement. No known. And they also go, clinical trials that compare direct effects on cardiovascular disease of coconut oil and other dietary oils have not been reported. What? Did they even look? Like we just told you about one that was published in PubMed comparing coconut oil with soybean oil. Like, what do you mean? Like, how stupid do you think people are? Like, it's crazy.
Why is this coming out now? Because, I mean, coconut oil is not brand new. This stuff's been around for a long time. Why now?
In 2014, there was a big meta-analysis done basically backing up everything we were just saying. No connection between saturated fat intake and heart disease. American Heart Association didn't like that. They cited that study as the reason for this new position paper. So they came out with this rebuttal. And it's based on studies that date back to the 50s, the 60s. Like most of them were quite old. They don't have any new research to support this. And it's just a roundup of old information.
And here's some really other contradictions, like internal contradictions in the case they're building. They basically go, and the reason why there's no new studies and we're only going on these old studies, lies, first of all, because there are new studies. But they go, the reason why there are new studies is, to get that kind of statistical power, it would be too difficult, it'd be too expensive, blah, blah, blah. So they're basically saying that to get the statistical power to make a meaningful case, you would need a large patient population and these criteria, except the studies that they're using to build their case don't even fit the criteria they're describing. And then conveniently, they threw out the one study that does have that statistical power, which is the Women's Health Initiative, which studied over 12,000 women over 15 years, the largest nutritional intervention study, period. And guess what? Oh, it didn't support their hypothesis. So let's just pretend that one doesn't fucking exist and focus on these weird studies in Scandinavia, some in mental hospitals, some in like weird things with like clearly obvious study flaws and like clearly obvious design flaws. I don't know if why don't you talk about the Oslo study design flaws, Sean?
Well, there's one. It was a Finnish mental hospital. This is their big one. They keep coming back with this one again and again to prove their report. And they looked at all these people in this Finnish mental hospital. This is in 1972, mind you. And they were feeding them, saturated fat, and they were looking at the effects of it. And they found that it did raise cardiovascular disease risk in men, but not in the women. And furthermore, as we unearthed later on, a lot of these patients who were developing the cardiovascular disease, they were also being fed cardiotoxic medications. So this is not exactly a controlled trial with a fair analysis.
What is cardiotoxic medications even?
It's just some medication they were given that apparently had bad effects on their heart. So maybe that was what was causing.
You know what was going on in fucking mental hospitals in 1972? It was a shit show. Yeah. It was one flew over the cuckoo's nest.
I think they still use straitjackets.
Yeah, like it was. I mean, it's insane. And Scandinavia is more progressive generally than the U.S., but still, 1972 in a mental hospital was a fucking shit show, right? And there's no way that they could confound for all of the different variables that are being studied. The medication wasn't confounded for it. Like, yeah, you need to exclude medication that might skew things one way or the other. And then also to just say, we're just going to look at the men, not the women. I mean, it's this clearly blatant confirmation bias. And then the same thing in these other studies that they included. So they looked at only 4 studies, said only 4 studies meet our criteria. One was the mental hospital where they didn't confound for the psychiatric medicine. That could have been a possible issue. The other one was the Oslo study. And in the Oslo study, they basically had one group that had a full dietary intervention, had someone sitting with them every week talking about the diet and nutrition. And when you look at the memoirs of the person who put together the study, they also noted, just as a side note, we cut their sugar intake by about half too. What? You cut their sugar intake by about half too? That's not a fucking trial. That's full dietary intervention on one side and a fucking free-for-all on the other side. And the same with the Predimed trial. So that's 2 of their 4 trials. And then the third, the Predimed trial, 3 years in, they were doing the same thing where they were giving full dietary intervention to one group and nothing to the other group, right? Because you should be able to do counseling on both sides to make it even. That's a genuine control. That's genuine randomization and trial control. And then change one variable, which is just the diet. But the counseling is a massive variable on its own. And they weren't doing that for the first 3 years. And then so 3 years in, they didn't want to scrap the trial because they realized it was bogus. So like, and so we just started that up 3 years in. That trial gets thrown out the fucking window. Like you can't do that. You can't change the placebo 3 years in and then use the data in a longitudinal study. Like, doesn't work.
Yeah, here's the thing. As I was doing some research on this, I wanted to get my investigative journalism on. And because growing up, my dad had heart problems, right? So I pictured the American Heart Association as, the
Heroes.
Heroes, the ideal organization. Of course, now I know, they had doctors telling my dad to, eat, I can't believe it's not butter, all this stuff that eventually led to his death. And, so this kind of bothered me. So I kind of went in, you look at these studies, and this happens all the time. The organizations, they put out these things. There's a money trail, and there's lobbyists, and there's people that have influence in the way they do things. And if you go down the cereal aisle, you go look at a box of Honey Nut Cheerios with 10, 15 grams of sugar in it. Guess what's on there? The logo for the American Heart Association. Yep. And we all know what sugar does to everybody. That's been proven time and time again. But one thing I found is I looked at their advisory board. These are the people that advise the American Heart Association on, what their stance is going to be on certain things. And of course, who did I find? I found somebody who is the communications director for the U.S. canola oil industry.
Whoa, weird.
Who they said you should replace your coconut oil with olive oil, which we all agree is still great. But they threw in, canola oil in their vegetable oil. Seems a little fishy to me. I don't know about you guys.
There's at least two of them from the canola association.
Yeah, there's two, and Monsanto's in there as well.
There's also Coca-Cola and Subway. Exactly. And there's a lot of corporate sponsorship going on.
There's a couple factors here. One is the factor. I think there's a brilliant Francis Bacon quote that says, and I'll read it. The human understanding, once it has adopted opinions, either because they were already accepted and believed or because it likes them, draws everything else to support and agree with them. And though it may meet a greater number and weight of contrary instances, it will, with great and harmful prejudice, ignore or condemn or exclude them by introducing some distinction in order that the authority of these earlier assumptions may remain intact and unharmed. So there's this kind of consistency and this pride and this ego and this inflexibility of changing your opinion, which certainly when people who've made a career are based upon one thing, they don't like to change, and there's actually another study done that I dug up that showed something similar in that they actually looked at an analysis of professors who died at the peak of their prowess. And when they died, a meta-analysis was done of all of the new citations that came that advanced the field forward, people putting out new theories. And like, it really took people dying before actually scientific opinion changed because there's such a conformism to the status quo. It's very difficult for these things to break through. So that's definitely part of it. And then, as you said, then you got to look at what the other influences are, because the American Heart Association is a nonprofit organization. It's an entity, and every organism or entity, it has a primary drive, and that is survival. Like, doesn't matter if it's a corporate entity, it doesn't matter if it's a human entity. There's a primary drive for that entity to survive. And they're getting a shitload of their funding from companies who are deeply invested in selling their oils, right?
Yeah, and what I also really hate, kind of bothers me, is so I was looking at where they get most of their donations. I was looking at their financial records from their donations, and it's all pharmaceutical companies. It's all the makers of all these heart drugs and everything, which is, I mean, if you're a business owner and you're in the business of selling pills to, for people's, heart health, it's kind of contradictory to your profits to, for people to end up healthy.
Well, this is the statins issue, right? Because statins will lower so they basically put out a case that said, all cholesterol leads to heart disease. Well, a very specific type of cholesterol leads to heart disease, and what creates that situation is intake of sugar. But let's not mind that. But let's just say, so they created this hypothesis, and this, which is largely true, that a high amount of this LDL cholesterol and a low amount of HDL cholesterol, is a contributing factor, right? But instead of looking at the actual specifics, they just said, well, if we just lower all cholesterol, then people will be better off. So they introduced this whole class of drugs whose only target was to lower cholesterol based upon the assumption that lower cholesterol was going to improve, cardiac outcomes. And it's really fucking dubious when you actually look at what that's happening, because cholesterol is an incredibly important substrate for the human body. It's like correlated to the production of hormones. And there's even like research that show like people who, don't have adequate cholesterol, they're more likely to commit suicide and have all of these other different issues that come up because it's fucking with your hormone systems. It's fucking with all forms of health and cancer as well. Cancer incidences rise.
More likely to die of cancer.
More likely to die of cancer as well. But when you look at something so narrow, like they're trying to do, statins just looking at lowering cholesterol just looking at heart, you're not factoring in, oh, well, people are killing themselves and dying of cancer. Maybe we should look at that too. And so there's like multiple levels. One, it's ineffective. It's the wrong hypothesis. Two, they're not even looking at the other ancillary effects of what will happen. And then we get these weird remnants of this coming around, like people not eating egg yolks. Like what the fuck?
How long did that go for?
Egg whites. You still see egg whites. Yeah. Like I'll go to a place that'll be like a healthy spa and it'll be an egg white omelet. I'll be like, fuck you, egg white omelet.
Egg beaters.
Like what are you talking? Egg. Like that's the good cholesterol. That's the stuff those are the good dogs. Those are the fucking Australian shepherds that are going to take these wily, rabid, mangy mutts and take them back to the fucking pound. Like you need the egg whites. What the fuck are you doing? Yeah. And it's this crazy thing that once momentum starts though, someone gets in their head, I'm going to make the healthy choice. I'm going to go with the egg whites. It's not the fucking healthy choice. It's not it.
Well, they've got us questioning common sense, which should tell anybody that natural foods, what you find around you in the environment, is the way to go. But the government would rather have you have these, processed oils that are not found in nature in their natural state. It makes no sense. How could anything that grows on a tree be inferior to something that comes out of a lab?
Yeah, it's funny. I was looking about because I was looking more into the vegetable oil thing, because it's vegetable oil. It says the word vegetable in it, right? It shouldn't be that bad for you. And then I kind of looked at how it's made. There's about a 5-6 layer progression of chemical engineering that goes in to making vegetable oil. It's almost, I use ethanol in my car. It's not that far away from ethanol. It's crazy.
Yeah, and not looking at the production of trans fats and these other things that are, everybody agrees are shit for you. The hydrogenation. Like they recently, hydrogenated oils were like the norm for a long time and supported by the AHA. Everything was all good. And then finally, the FDA was like, look, this is just not safe. And they removed it from the GRAS status, generally regarded as safe. Just because it's like, at that point, it was just really negligent, for them not to remove that. But still, the process producing these vegetable oils is shit. And the production of, there's a production of like the toxicity that's associated with it too, and shifting your omega-6 ratio, because these are all, polyunsaturated, very high in omega-6 oils, and shifting that ratio, it's supposed to be in balance with your omega-3s, which are like fish oil and flax and these different other things. It just shifts that way in balance, puts your body in a pro-inflammatory state. And if you talk to any, really good functional medicine doctor, look at the research, inflammation is one of the root causes of almost every disease we're looking at now. Like inflammation is the thing that everybody's looking at. I mean, there's doctors who are quoting and saying that like all doctors as their specialty should be inflammologists, inflammologists, So it's a crazy world we're in, where we just have these old relics based on funding, based on momentum, that are literally killing people.
Yeah. And so when we go back into speaking about general fat, like we need fat, right? And one of the biggest things is our gut health. And as we've learned, the gut is responsible for so many things in our body, from neurological to everything else. And fat helps your body and your gut absorb nutrients.
Yeah. And improves satiety too. Like one of the reasons why we're overeating, like it actually all the way back to chewing. Like as soon as you start chewing fat, your body starts to relax. Like the production of the satiety hormones, like ghrelin. Okay, like I don't need to eat so much, and I think part of one of the things that's contributed to this massive overeating is you starve yourself of fat. The body's hungry for fat, so it just keeps eating. Like I gotta keep eating. I'm not getting enough fat. It knows it's not getting enough fat, so it's like, well, we'll just keep eating until we get enough. and
Yeah,
it's a problem.
It also slows down the digestion of food too. So if you eat the American Heart Association recommended diet with its breads and its cereals and its juices, nothing is slowing down the digestion of all those carbs, all that fast sugar. So you're going to have blood sugar spikes and then crashes. You're going to have energy lulls throughout the day as a result. There's all kinds of health problems that can come as a result of that. If you just simply added a little fat to that, it would slow down the digestion. You'd have steadier energy, less digestive problems, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm. So most people that listen to this podcast are smart enough to read through the bullshit, and they're not going to put down their coconut oil anytime soon. But what kind of effects does this have to people that are not educated? The United States is getting more and more obese every single day. Children have terrible diets too, growing up in school systems, and they follow these same guidelines that they put out.
It's dangerous because anybody who is finally starting to come around to the idea that, I've heard from some people that I should start eating more fats, they just get this. And the thing, like USA Today, they produced a video, like a hype video for their coconut oil thing. And the very first line of the video, they go, coconut oil, of course, coconut oil isn't healthy. It's fat. Like, you just make it. I mean, people's attention span is short. Like, you make it to that. It isn't healthy. It's fat. I knew it. I knew it all along. Got to cut my fats out.
Yeah.
Like, that's going to fucking kill you. And it's been proven in every type of meta-analysis, like when you start to look at when this dietary advice, when we started cutting out fat, that's when there's this massive hockey stick spike in all of these diseases, right? But people who want support of their old thing, that inflexibility of thinking, they're just like, okay, good, I was on the right track. I'll just cut those fats out. I'll get my canola oil, my potato chips. Fucking, it's really, really, I think, one of the most dangerous things. I mean, this is like a Holocaust happening every couple of years of just people dying from largely bad information. And some of it is their own, dietary decisions and inability to control and, addiction to different sugar and different things that are going on. But a lot of it is based on really bad information. Like, I've worked with people. We have people here at the Onnit Academy, and I'll ask them, like, how much, you eating? And they're like, well, I'm trying, like, obese, like heavy people, like, are you eating enough? Like, well, I'm trying, but that programming of if I eat, I'm going to get fatter, which is really not shown to be true. Like the Framingham Heart study was another one where they said the more calories someone ate, the more cholesterol they ate, the more fat they ate, the less weight they gained, the more active they were. And it's just reversing this kind of idea, which largely developed because of the word itself. Fat equals fat. Dietary fat is going to be fat in my body. It's dead opposite. And it's this dangerous correlation that people have just because of the nomenclature itself. And it's scary to me.
Yeah, you look at these epidemics that we're facing now, obesity, diabetes, things that were virtually unknown about 100 years ago. They all correlate with the reduction of saturated fat in the diet because of the government and the pushing of sugar onto people. It's probably not a coincidence.
Yeah, that's such a weird thing. I look back and you look back at the 50s and the 40s, there's like advertisements. Make sure to get your sugar, kids. It's crazy.
Even in Australia, like I was in Australia in 2004, 2005, and they had this drink, Milo, right? Which is basically like Nestle Quick, which is just like tons of sugar and like a little bit of chocolate flavor, right? And this was like, they were promoting this as like the sports drink, the active drink for kids, like just kids playing soccer. And it's like this was a health drink, and they were getting away with promoting it as like a health drink. It's just fucking sugar. It's insane.
Yeah. There's money behind everything. It seems like there's just money behind everything. So, this is not going to be the end of it. There's going to be more things that the American Heart Association comes out and says is bad for you. Other organizations, you might say something. How can we kind of, read through the lines and make the right decision on what to believe and what not to believe?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question, and I think you have to really. I think the swelling of support, the amount of people that have come out and started putting out good, evidence-based research on this study, and that's continued to come out. I think it's just about focusing on, if you're somebody who's aware of this and you're listening to this and you have your buddies who are aware, like, we're going to be putting out an article. There's a great article by Gary Taubes. There's a bunch of different great articles that are out there. And we're just going to have to take it upon ourselves to educate each other. And, these large scale media, I don't want to sound like somebody talking about fake news now, because that's not what I'm talking about. But there's forces at play that are manipulative, and so I think we have to take it upon ourselves to look at the research, go back to the primary data, look at the, what the evidence actually is, and then start supporting truth, on the local level in our own life and with our friends, because we can't always rely on these macro sources. The change is going to have to come internally.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at it, USA Today, they had a headline. They knew there was going to garner a shit ton of attention and there's going to get people to share that article, comment, and clicks. But if you look at a lot of those comments, a lot of people were calling bullshit on it to begin with. So.
Yeah, and they're an organism that wants to survive. They survive on clicks, so the more sensational their headline is that they can support. And how do you get that in the health field? Well, you give someone bad news about their good habits or good news about their bad habits. Like one or the other, you have to, do something that causes people to stop and say, huh? And, they found something from this report that they could back up, and it was something that if they got attacked, they could just shuffle the blame to the American Heart Association. So fuck it, but that goes against, really something that they talked about, Gary Taubes talked about, which is the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. Right. And that's something that both the AHA and anybody who's supporting these kind of confirmation bias claims is really violating. They're violating the principle of do no harm. And that's I think what we got to look at. And we're not saying like, we're not even promoting like, yeah, have fucking 5 spoonfuls of coconut oil a day. People go crazy with coconut oil. They're like, put it in your mouth and it'll pull the toxins out through your gums. Like, no, I don't know. No, I don't see any evidence for that. Like, don't go crazy, but still the research is there. Saturated fat is not the enemy. Sugar's the enemy, but that's another fucking podcast.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with whole foods, and they're self-regulating. Like we were saying before, if you're going to eat fat, it's going to be satiating. It's hard to overeat it. Yeah, you can guzzle
really
a jar
is.
of coconut oil, but it takes some effort.
You're going to get sick. You're going to feel like gross. Shoveling that much.
Sugar is not hard to overeat.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I know that for sure.
Yeah, breads.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you can eat a whole pizza.
I could definitely eat a whole pizza.
Yeah.
But anyway, guys, thanks a bunch. Everybody, go to onit.com/academy. We have a great article that Sean Heisen here is working on, and we're going to lay out a bunch of the things we talked about today. And anything else, fellas?
No, I think just keep spreading the news. Like, just help people out. Point to the data too, and try to. It's hard not to get emotional about this. It's hard for me not to get emotional about it, but when you're emotional about it and you're presenting something emotionally, it's always going to come across as less credible. So whenever you're trying to convince someone to, be gentle, point to the science, show them the meta-analysis, be patient, because it's hard for people to switch their mind. It's hard for you to believe something one way your whole life and then switch it on a dime. But the evidence is there. So, just keep pointing to that and slowly but surely we'll make progress and start to slow down these epidemics.